once as a child of payroll's embrace, but now I see its power, its impact, its place. From taxes to pensions, compliance to pay, we fuel every workforce, day after day. From Sydney to Seoul, from London to Rome, we pay the wages that build dreams and homes. It's data, it's tech, it's strategy too. It's complex, it's vital, it's built for you. We cut through the jargon, no room for mistake, keeping businesses thriving, compliant and safe. Forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
They think there's a button, how little they know the global complexities behind every payroll. We drive the economy, powering trade. Without us in place, no one gets paid.
Payroll analytics beyond the sum, tech-driven systems, the future has come. But it's people, not machines, who bring payroll its soul. That's why it's time to stand up and let our voices unfold. We cut through the jargon, no room for mistake, keeping businesses thriving, compliant and safe. Forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
Double three and IRS 94 ones in the US, UK, PBICS, salary sacrifice, and FPS, BIR in Manila, withholdings no joke, single touch in Australia, so no one goes broke. C&D in China, DSN in France, global payroll's a delicate dance. From taxes to pensions, with zero delay, we make sure the world gets its well-earned pay.
So here's to the pros who work through the night, ensuring each paycheck is perfectly right. Payroll's a calling, a passion, a pride, a global community, we stand side by side. We cut through the jargon, no room for mistake, keeping businesses thriving, compliant and safe. Forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine. Payroll's the future, it's time to be bold. It's time to stand up and let our voices unfold. We cut through the jargon, no room for mistake, keeping businesses thriving, compliant and safe. Forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
So, bonjour, hello, and welcome to Global Payfest 25. I'm Luke Stockbridge, Associate at JGA Recruitment. I'm thrilled to be your host for the Canada stop of our 24-hour Global Payfest. Canada offers one of the most structured and equitable payroll systems, but that doesn't mean it's simple. Between federal and provincial tax requirements, bilingual documentation, employment insurance, and statutory benefits, payroll teams need to stay on their toes, especially when managing a national workforce across multiple provinces. Joining me today is Dana Nairn, a seasoned payroll leader and principal advisory consultant at Kognitiv. Dana is a passionate Workday implementation advisor, as well as a certified payroll compliance professional within the National Payroll Institute, and has worked in payroll and HR-related roles since 2007. With a keen eye for problem solving and a strong commitment to excellence, Dana helps organizations optimize their Workday solutions to drive efficiency, boost productivity, and support long-term success. Beyond her consulting work, Dana is a dedicated blogger, regularly sharing insights on Workday best practices, innovation, and professional growth. A proud Canadian, she is also an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and transparency within the workplace. Dana's impact extends beyond the systems she helps implement. She's committed to empowering others on their digital transformation journey and can be found actively engaging within the Workday community on LinkedIn. So Dana, thank you so much for joining us. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you support organizations with Canadian payroll?
Yes, thank you, Luke. I may have started my career in human resources way back when, and now I work in HR software consulting. But in between all of that, I took a job at a fairly large-sized organization in the city that I live that's federally regulated. And through them, I was able to obtain my payroll designation, gain a ton of experience, and I took that with me even when I transitioned out of payroll doing HRIS work. So today, along with a really great group of experts, I help thousands of Canadians every day with their payroll questions via a Facebook user group of all things, specifically targeted to payroll professionals. So that's how I'm really linked into all of that today.
All right, great. Thanks, Dana. Well, look, today we're going to explore Canada's payroll structure, recent legislative updates, and best practices for staying compliant across provinces. We'll also review a case study and end with a live Q&A. So let's get started with our expert overview.
Sure.
Thanks, Dana. Today we'll explore Canada's payroll structure, recent legislative updates, and best practices for staying compliant across multiple provinces. We'll also review a case study and end with a live Q&A. So let's get started with your expert overview.
Sure, thanks again. There are so many complexities, of course, with any payroll. Canada is no stranger to a bunch of fun things. So I'm going to go through a number of those, and I'm going to keep it fairly high level because unless you're processing payroll every single day, and if this session was about a how-to, I would go into that. But I just want to make sure that anybody paying attention to this presentation knows where they need to go. So first and foremost, of course, there's payroll responsibilities, right? The Canada Revenue Agency, or the CRA, has guidelines laid out for every employer, and they must comply with certain minimum standards. Of course, keeping records is one of them. You have to keep records, payroll records, that is, for 36 months for active employees. And when an employee leaves the organization, you actually have to keep it for another 36 months. So something small like that is something just that you need to be aware of, in Canada, of course. And there's other things you need to be responsible for, like obtaining a social insurance number. That's like in America, they have the social security number. That is our legal way that we can work. We all have a SIN number. And a temporary series that starts with a 9 is for our temporary foreign workers, anybody that's here in a temporary visa. And it's really important that we still obtain the proof of that because we cannot otherwise pay you if you're not legally able to work. So that's a big thing here too. And then another responsibility that we have is related to payroll forms, specifically the TD1. Now, TD1 is just a number, a name, a letter and number, right? It's just some forms. But in Canada, we know those as the forms that tell us how much tax to deduct. There's both federal and there's provincial. And of course, that means that there could be quite a few depending on your organization. But it is payroll's responsibility to ensure that you have completed TD1 forms for your employees. There's a lot of organizations that still do these in paper because they're smaller and they don't use an ERP or HRIS type of system where they gather it electronically. But you're still responsible for it, and you still have to keep those records on hand. So once you have that in place, and of course a few other things to get people paid, we all know, we really get into a fun topic where in Canada you have to actually determine if your employees are considered to be federal or provincial. Now, if you're federal, you probably know about it. In fact, that is my background. However, provincial is, it's by province, and I'll explain what that means. Basically, it's like this. If you're considered a federal employee, you work for an organization that is considered to be spanning across borders. So an example is where I work, which would be an organization that did grain buying and selling. Grain is agriculture, and agriculture touches all of our provinces. It's not specific to Saskatchewan, where I live today. So that organization was governed actually under what we call the Canada Labor Code, or the CLC. That is just one example. There's others like healthcare and financial institutions that also fall under that. And if you don't fall under that, let's just say your local grocery store, perhaps, you would be considered provincially regulated or legislated, and your rules for how you should be paid and all of the things like your absences and all eligibility for promotions and whatnot, that's all going to be province specific. And when we talk about province specific, it just means that when you're the payroll processor, the rules that apply to the employees that you're supporting is all within the Employment Standards Act of that specific province. Every single one has it. It's all online. And in my work that I do on with the payroll support group, we're always referencing go to your ESA because it's in there. So that's a big thing. But again, you'll know for the most part if you're federal, provincial, the key is that you know where your rules lie. So now you have your information about employees, you know where your rules are. And then you really just get into processing. There's some very specific fun things about Canada, of course. I'm going to mention province of employment to start. Province of employment, or we call the POE, is just something where you have to actually look at rules for where somebody works versus where they live. And I say where somebody works loosely because I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can look it up online, CRA, province of employment. It'll get you lots of information, but that is where you have to make a determination for workers or employees that do not reside in the same jurisdiction that your business is actually paying them from. So an example may be an organization that has a head office in Winnipeg, Manitoba, but they hire employees working remotely in other provinces. You actually have to go through the test of the province of employment to determine if they are to be taxed based on Manitoba or based on where they reside elsewhere. So that is a big deal. And of course, it impacts the taxes when we talked about the TD1. So it's important that you go through that. Now, the other things that I don't have noted on this slide, but a payroll deduction worthy, we're talking about federal government legislates, the CRA says you have to deduct, of course, income tax. Each province will deduct as well income tax. So I came across recently, somebody was confused. You mean I have two taxes? Yes, yes, you do. It's not double, it's just different. So we pay our income taxes. And of course, there's some other fun things. In Canada, we have the Canada Pension Plan, or CPP, and it has it's a whole bunch of rules around it, of course. But the point with that is that you contribute a certain amount every pay up to a maximum every year. And that amount goes into the fund, the Canada Pension Plan Fund. The goal is at the end of that when you retire, that there would be money left that you can draw from as a retired Canadian citizen. So that's the CPP. Both employees and employers contribute to that, actually. So it is a joint effort, we can say. And then another standard payroll deduction you're going to see is employment insurance, or EI. Similarly, it is contributed by both employees and employers. It, however, does not have a max, and there's some other rules around it. But what I'll just talk about with EI is the point of it is that it goes into a different fund for employment insurance, and it allows employees to be funded for when they are laid off, when maybe their position is eliminated, when they take leaves of absence that may be approved to be paid by Service Canada. That's the entity that covers that. Basically, it's a fund to pay employees for something that is not part of their employment. It's like unemployment insurance. If anybody here is from America and they're paying attention to that kind of thing, it's just a fund for additional money. And we contribute a little bit. Employees actually contribute a little less than employers in that case, but no matter, every employee is going to see that in their payroll in Canada. After we talk about payroll deductions, the other fun thing is, of course, benefit deductions. So something that is so fun, and I'm jumping to taxable benefits because it's so related, is that there are certain benefits, health, dental, life insurance, AD&D, all those things that we know that we have coverage for, life insurance, they may be taxed at source on your pay. You may pay it, they actually be deducted tax on them, or you may not. And in fact, we have a province in Canada, Quebec, who taxes certain things that other provinces don't. So, this presentation is to share knowledge with those that don't live in Canada necessarily and are needing to learn some information about how we do things. And that's something to keep in mind, is that if your organization provides benefits to your employees, you actually need to know where you're paying them from or where they live and what the benefits are, because you got to make sure that you're taxing them correctly, or you'll be overstating or understating, of course, what those are. So taxable benefits is a big thing. And of course, you get to see those fund deductions in your pay if they apply. And I wanted to talk about vacation pay because, at the end of the day, after we've gone and we've earned our money, which we haven't talked about here, but we know you're gonna earn a salary, you're gonna have benefits, you're gonna have taxes, CPP and EI. What about vacation? When do I get to take time off? It's always a concern and a question we have. And provincially legislated, actually, in the ESAs, the Employment Standards Act of every province, those provincial governments legislate a minimum requirement. The minimum across Canada would be 2 weeks, but we often see where it in fact is increased to 3. Just depends where you live. But the point with why I have this called out here for a province-specific minimum is that although a province can specify or will specify the minimum you must legally provide your employees as a time off, any organization can put in a policy to give them more. It's just a minimum. This day and age, you're seeing a lot of changes, especially with salaried employees, workers like myself that are expected to do, the work that I'm given in the time frame that I have, and I'm paid a salary for that. And my vacation isn't necessarily taken by weeks, but that kind of thing does add into the fun of, okay, well, what do we put in our policy? Does it at least cover the minimum? Something else to that point is actually that there's a union, like a trade union, and there's obviously many of those. A union's collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, will often dictate differently than the province, because in fact they want to give the employees more and they're entitled to that. So also something to keep in mind, you may have a provincial minimum, but you can set a company policy. But if you have a union, that actually trumps both, because it should always be above the minimum. That said, vacation could be talked about for longer. The key here is that you actually will earn vacation on earnings, and we really want to make sure that, again, back to Canada being equitable, that's something that every employee gets and gets to take the time off and is paid appropriately for it. Further to that, just remembering that earnings affect deductions, and all of these things put together make a delightful little pay package. Anybody that's processing payroll for the first time doesn't know where to start. Related to these points being so high level, you just need to go to the CRA online. It's a really, really, actually, for a government website, it's actually very thorough, and I reference it all the time. But to that, Luke, why don't we move on and talk about what's next in the presentation?
Absolutely. Well, look, brilliant. Thanks for that, Dana. Look, let's have a look at how this applies in a real world scenario. So I'll just switch my slide. So we're going to look through this in a real world scenario. So this company, PolarNet, so they're a BC-based software firm. A British Columbia employee resigns on the 7th of November with a bonus to be paid out, as well as vacation pay in lieu. Some of the challenges here, I'll just run through these. So we've got a 6-day deadline to process final pay, calculating the bonus tax, processing vacation pay, processing benefits for mid-month termination, and record of employment reporting and submission with pay in lieu.
All sorts of things. You think that it would be easy. Hires are easy. Okay, you get them in the system, you get all their information, you start paying them, and when they terminate, oh goodness, all these things have to happen. So in this scenario, I'll go through each of these points and why they're important. I'm not going to work out the value. That's not what I'm here for, to calculate things. I don't do math, and that's not the point. I just want you to know, if you have this scenario, what you have to do or look for. So the fact that it's a British Columbia employee was specifically chosen for this case study because of the specific deadline that province has for when an employee leaves an organization. It says in the Employment Standards Act that you have to pay them within 6 days of their final day. That 6 days may not fall into a normal pay period. November 7th might very well be the first Friday of the week, of the pay rather, and you have to pay it maybe before your cutoff and your actual pay period ends. You have to be aware of that. Every province is different in this way, and some are much nicer. They say, just pay it with the next one, with the next normal pay. But you have to know that when you are undertaking employees in each province, because you do have responsibility legally to process that. So key number 1 is be aware of when you have to make this final payout. With that in mind, then you have some other things. So we're going to talk about one of our favorite things in Canada, the bonus tax. The bonus tax method is important because there are a number of earnings, and it's all available online, but certain earnings are considered to be bonuses or irregular payments. And that's important because Canada's bonus tax method applies to those earnings. The calculation is different. Now, if you're somebody that's working for an organization that uses an ERP, like a Workday or a Ceridian, a UKG, all SAP, all of the things, the system probably is already going to do everything for you as long as you set it up correctly. But if the system's not doing it for you, like many of us have to deal with, you just have to know that there's a specific calculation to get there. I'll keep it fairly high level here, but the point is, let's say they receive a bonus of $5,000. The calculation comes down to, you actually take that $5,000 and divide it over the number of pay periods in the year and for this terminated employee, it won't be, let's say biweekly, it won't be 26, it may be only 22. Let's just pick that based on November. So you actually have to take that $5,000 bonus they're getting, divide it over 52 weeks, and you would determine what amount has to be technically added to their earnings in each pay period. So let's say they earn $1,000 every biweekly pay period, and now they're leaving and getting a $5,000 bonus. If that $5,000 divided over 22 pay periods comes out to another $10, and excuse me, I'm not mathing, but if it's an extra $10, actually, their earnings from the beginning of the year are now technically supposed to be $1,010. That's the bonus tax method, and it's very important because that means that from pay period 1 to pay period 22, they've actually not had enough deducted, because that's how bonuses work. So what happens on that payment is it calculates all the way back, determines what's not been deducted because you're only getting it in November, and that is the tax you pay. It's not just based on a percent. It's not just based on the tax tables that we have in Canada. It's actually based on a retroactive look back. So that's really, really important for bonus tax for specific earnings. Again, you can find all that information on the CRA's website. Not everything is in there, but it's something to call out. So with that, then we get to a few more things that aren't as difficult, right? You've got vacation pay. Now, I mentioned in the prior slide, just talking about provincial legislation for vacation. I didn't go into details about that. Some provinces have actually a different calculation there too, where you may accrue or earn hours to be taken, but in fact, what you get paid when you take them, it may actually be based on earnings in a prior year. Whoa, that blows my mind up every time I think about it, honestly, Luke. I try not to think too hard because I don't process payroll every day, but all of my friends out there in the payroll world, they are very well aware of it. But this is where it comes into play, is that at the end of the day, when you have an employee leave the organization, that actually goes out the window. And what you're left with is, well, what did they not take? What is the remaining balance of the vacation? That should be a standard that many of us are familiar with. So here, all you do is you just make sure that, what's not been taken is paid out, and that vacation pay is taxed with their regular earnings. You also need to just ensure that you, of course, in your system, wipe that out. We don't want any sort of leftovers remaining. But yeah, vacation pay is pretty straightforward, but you must ensure you pay it out as well. Now, it is going to come up again here at the end when I talk about ROE, so just keep that in mind. But that's another piece of our terminations. And then another fun one is, of course, if we have benefits. This one comes up a lot that I see in systems that it's automated, where it's this beginning of the month termination. And that's why I set up this example like this. Let's say, because it's very common to have a monthly benefit deductions. And when I say monthly, I want to be clear. Monthly in that the vendor or provider would bill monthly. However, if we're on a biweekly pay period, we're not paying it monthly. We're probably paying it on every check. So what's important here is that if you expect to be deducting a full month's worth of benefits, and now your employee is leaving you in the first period of 2 in the month, now you have responsibility to catch that up. It's either that, or many organizations just choose to pay it for them. If that's not your policy, standard practice would be, all right, maybe the benefit deductions are $50 for the month, but actually now we're not going to get that. They're going to be gone. So you have to pay attention to that part, because I have been in a situation where I needed to reconcile benefit deductions. And I'll tell you, it's always a termination that will get you because you didn't take enough. So making sure that you catch up or top up, extra deduct, whatever you need to do to get those off of that final pay. And then after all of that is said and done, right, we have our final earnings, of course, making sure they're all in and tagged. We have our bonus that we're paying out. We have our vacation pay. We have benefits, a pay in lieu payment. Just going to say about pay in lieu. That is used when we actually want to pay somebody just in lieu of working. So let's say this scenario is that the employee resigned, and a great example just is going to a competitor. That happened in my past days because you know, the market and where I live, there's multiple organizations you can work for that do essentially the same thing. So if somebody was a salesperson, let's say at this agricultural firm that I was at, and they got this great offer at another agricultural firm, typically what happens is the employer, just for purposes of conflict of interest, they tend to just let the employee go then. However, there are minimum requirements that I didn't talk about that you would find in the ESA of the province you're working with that state how, like the minimum notice and how much you have to pay an employee. So maybe the minimum notice is 2 weeks and they've given 2 weeks, and you say, oh, but you're going to my competitor over there. I'm going to let you go and pay you in lieu instead. Honestly, fine. The employee's still getting legally what they're entitled to. But now what you have is just another payment to make. I'm calling this one out on here because for a couple of reasons, not specifically with payroll processing, but more of a system view. This has come up many, many times for me. If a person is leaving in the scenario I just explained and is being paid in lieu, their last day of work is the last day of work. It is not the last day that they, at the end of the 2-week period that they resigned. That is not accurate. They are not working. They are not insurable. They are not pensionable. They are not eligible for anything past that day when they no longer work at the office. But we're still paying them an amount. So like you said, $1,000 per pay. So maybe it would be $500 instead for the 1 week, but in fact, they gave their 2 weeks notice. So in fact, the employer may owe them another $1,000 if they're saying, oh, it's okay, just go, you're going to Jim Bob's place, and we don't want to have a conflict there. So pay in lieu is going to be something that comes up for everybody and is taxed, of course. It is not the bonus tax method, so you have that. You don't have to worry about it. But I'm going to move on to the final little piece, and this is where you just need to be aware of all these different things. It's the record of employment. I'm going to keep it simple. A record of employment, or ROE, is basically an application form to Service Canada for every employee that leaves an organization or is placed on leave, maybe just is laid off, any sort of break in service for any reasons that their pay stops. We submit this record of employment to the government, to Service Canada, to say, all right, employees had a work stoppage. And why that's important is I mentioned earlier about how you can apply, or you can get EI. You can actually get payments for not working. That's that bucket of money that EI goes into. Well, the government has to know about it. So employees will apply to receive it. But the application is only complete if the employer, the organization that paid them, has submitted the record of employment. So this is important because depending on how you're doing this, maybe your system has it all and you just have to configure it. Like in Workday, where I work every day, we just configure it to do all the things automatically. But people that are still doing this manually and going to the website and inputting everything themselves need to be aware of the right way to do it. There's a really, really helpful guide for how to complete the record of employment that if you're here and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what that is, let me go look it up. Just look it up, guide, record of employment. And in there, it explains so many things. One of the things is, of course, that you have to submit them as a requirement, but it'll tell you how you have to fill it out. And with this example, in fact, what we're going to see is that there are a number of different boxes. When we talk about boxes, like the year-end documents are T4s, or then there's boxes, but there's the same thing on the ROE. The ROE has boxes for your the amount you earned. It actually breaks down by pay period what you earned. And in fact, this is where now the bonus, the vacation pay, and the pay in lieu come into play, because there are specific boxes on the record of employment for those. So when you process them, it's good to know what you expect downstream. That goes for a lot of things, but the record of employment is really the last stop in the employment relationship in payroll land, where you need to make sure that you're reporting correctly what they have earned, because in fact, it may impact their application for that EI. So you get all that data, you put it all in, you've got your bonus, your vacation, your pay in lieu. And because I mentioned, well, we let them go on the day they resigned because they were going to Jim Bob's place of work, and that's a competitor for us, then that's actually where you put that in their last day of work. And that's it, you're done. You submit it and you have completed really your obligations to the government. So I know this case study doesn't go into specific calculations, Luke, but I hope that somebody out there globally is like, okay, this is helpful and I know where to go at least to look for the information.
Great, thanks, Dana. So what's new in Canadian payroll right now?
Well, there's always some new things, but the one thing that really ruffled a couple of feathers for a while, and we knew well in advance about it, but it was a change, is what we call the CPP2. It actually came out January 1st of 2024, so we're well into over a year now of that. But I mentioned the Canada Pension Plan CPP earlier, where there's an employee and an employer deduction, and I didn't go into the details, but this is a second one. And really the intent of it is, truthfully, I think the government found that the CPP fund was dwindling because we had a lot of boomers retiring and then going to draw. And people like me who still had, 30 years ahead of us were looking and saying, how are we going to draw from it if it's gone? So that said, we get something else to contribute to it. However, this actually only applies to any employee that has earnings that are above the annual maximum pensionable earnings. That's just some calculation. You can look that all up, but this only comes into play in that case. So if an employee has earned over that number, then the second CPP will begin, and it's just got its own calculation. That would be the newest thing that all organizations have to comply with, because that's a federal legislation. Aside from that, every year payroll practitioners have to expect that there will be changes to potentially the EI max or the EI calculation, the CPP, TD1 forms. We're always eagerly waiting the brand new January 1 TD1 forms to download and provide to new hires. And then minimum wage, federally or provincially, often updates as well every year, but not necessarily in January 1. We see often an April 1st or a July 1st. So those are just things that you have to keep aware of. And, to keep up with all of this, because this is so high level, it's impossible for you to get everything you need out of this. There's a few ways I wanted to share with the watchers or listeners of this. One, just make sure that if you support, of course, that federal or provincial, the CLC versus the ESA, talked about that earlier. Be aware of your company policies, because company policies may not meet the minimums. In fact, that would be a problem. We always want to at least meet the minimum, if not exceed. So be aware of your company policies, but compared to the ESA, both of them are very, very important to play together. There are remittance deadlines. There's so much we could talk about related to deadlines for remitting your income tax and payroll deductions to the government, because the CPP, the EI, the income tax, they got to go somewhere. That depends on your organization's pay frequency, and that's something that can also be looked up. And the last couple of items, if you're looking for support, one excellent way is, of course, become a member of the National Payroll Institute. I would be remiss not to suggest that you become a member of that organization. You do not need a payroll designation to be a member, but it gets you access to a lot of resources, one being the info line. I'll put in a quick plug for that. It is staffed by Canadian professionals that will answer any questions people have, and that's all included in there, plus many other things. I'm, of course, a member, but I'm also designated. And then the last thing I would recommend, you'll get lots of information in my Facebook group, Canadian Payroll Professionals. Come and join us. Lots of past posts that will give you a ton of resources, and we'd love to have you. So what's next, Luke?
Great. Thanks for running through all of that, Dana. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now, but we have some questions regarding Canadian payroll.
You bet.
So question number one, can I just use the same tax codes and payroll set up for all employees across Canada?
Well, kind of going along with what I've already introed with in this discussion is, there are differences in provincial and federal legislation. There are statutory deductions that everybody has, that every employer will need to have set up for their employees. So tax codes, sure, yes, federal income tax. Provincial depends on which province or provinces that you need to have that for. CPP and EI, yes, across the board, everybody has that. It's when you get into the benefits. I mentioned Quebec has some taxable that other provinces don't. You need to be aware of that, and you can't just set it up to be the same for everybody. So can you? Yes and no, Luke. It does depend where you're located, but I think that as long as you know that, you know where to go.
And what is the deadline for issuing T4s and summary reports?
Yeah, the T4, our annual form that tells me how much money I made and how much income tax I paid to the government, that is due to be submitted by February, I was going to say February 28th, but technically in a leap year, it's the last day of February. I want to be clear on that, though, because many employees will ask this. They didn't get it on February 28th. Actually, that's not the legal requirement of an organization. They just have to send it off by the 28th. It has to be on its way. So that is the deadline for all of that. And in fact, something to add is that I should say that employers, this is newer, but important, is that you can actually do those electronically now, as long as there's via secure method. It used to be you had to mail them all. But yeah, last day of February.
Great. Is vacation pay taxed?
It is. I always reference, though, with specifics like how-tos, and I'm not going to do that here, with going to the CRA's website and finding out how to do it. But yes, vacation pay is taxed because it is an earning. Vacation pay is absolutely a taxable earning that you receive. I wish it wasn't. It feels like it could be a nice benefit to have it not taxed, but not. It is.
And so do we have to issue bilingual documentation in Quebec only or everywhere?
Well, the Official Languages Act that governs that does state that any citizen or employee in Canada is entitled to receive documentation in their language of choice, English or French. That said, You don't have to necessarily do that for the whole system. I want to be clear, right? So if I'm an employee in Quebec and I wish to receive my communication in French, I have that right to ask, and they do have the responsibility to provide. So do you have to issue it in that? No, but you may need to. Now I want to reference on this question though, where I worked for this agricultural organization. They had employees all across Canada and of course in Quebec. And what we actually were led by in terms of our HRIS system in translating everything for the employees there that worked in Quebec was that we actually just had to meet a minimum number of employees. So why that's important is that if it was 50 employees that we needed to have before we had to go and translate everything, that was huge because it would be a lot of money and time to actually do all that. Of course, they have since, it has grown, but at the time, as long as we stayed under 50, we only needed to provide the communication as requested. So you may need to, but legislated only at a certain number of employees. You will find, I will just add here, you will find that any government entity, like a post office, they have to be able to provide you with English speaking people.
Right.
Or French speaking.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so what happens if we misclassify an employee versus an independent contractor?
That's unfortunate if that happened. Before I answer that, the first thing you should always do if you're unsure is, again, on CRA's website, you just search employee versus self-employed. That's a thing. There's very specific criteria, a kind of a little test that you can go through to see if you have employed or hired a contractor or if they're truly an employee. Okay. So first things first, maybe, let's make sure we know what to do going forward. But how do we retroactively? I mean, you do technically have to go back and collect. That would be the right thing to do, to go and collect the deductions that they've had. Now, I don't want to, get too much into the weeds on the law. I don't doubt that if this has happened in real life, that an organization may have just made the change and gone forward. That's their choice. Of course, they're going to employment law and dealing with potential things that they might be audited on it. They might be audited and have to deal with it later. That's very possible. But the point is that if we're doing it right, we really should go back in time and deduct income tax, and the employer and employees should have to pay into CPP and DI.
And so last of the questions here. So what is a record of employment and why do we need to issue them?
Well, great question. And I went over that in my case study. So again, it's intended for somebody to be able to even consider getting approved to receive employment insurance. That's pretty important. If they don't have that, you're going to be getting a phone call with an unhappy employee saying, "Where's my ROE? I don't see it online." So you have that to issue. In the guide that I also referenced, there is very specifically in there, it talks about the deadlines, depending on the type of break in wages that has occurred in when you need to get that. It might be that you have to issue it within 7 days. You might not need that. It just depends. So the point is you absolutely have responsibilities to issue them, just like the rest of their pay. And if you don't, you're just mostly going to hear about it, and then you're going to fix your processes.
Great. Well, look, that comes to our last question. So look, Dana, thank you so much for your expertise. Canada's payroll system might be structured, but it's certainly not one size fits all, especially when you're dealing with multiple provinces and territories. So to our audience, thank you for being part of the Canada session of Global Payfest 25. We hope today gave you some clear insights on managing payroll north of the border and avoiding those common compliance traps. So remember, this session will be available on demand shortly after the event. But coming up next, we'll continue our journey through the Americas with a look at payroll in Mexico. So for the next session, I'll be joined by Alexander Cruz Sainz, who's Director of International Payroll at Hyatt Hotels. But Dana, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Can I go to Mexico with you? Just kidding. Yeah, of course, I want to thank you all for putting this together because it's such a great opportunity for people globally to be able to get little bite-sized bits of information. But just referencing what I said before, there's so much information out there. Don't feel ever like you don't know what you're doing. If you have the resources available, please, CRA, my Facebook group, go to LinkedIn, just connect with people across Canada. And we're all so willing to help you because we feel very, very strongly about ensuring that Canadians are paid accurately and timely. So yeah, I just appreciate being able to share this information. Thanks, Lou.
It's really great to have you on. And yeah, so merci. Thank you once again, Dana, and we'll see you all in Mexico.